Welcome to the Legally Speaking podcast. I'm your host, Rob Hanna. This week, I'm delighted to be joined by Daniel Leo and Ben Cisneros. Daniel is the CEO of Pacific Rugby Players Welfare, an organisation which supports professional and semi-professional players of the Pacific Island heritage in the UK and Europe. Daniel is also a director of Tusisala Films and has previous experience as a professional rugby player. Before this, Daniel worked as an athlete ambassador at Right to Play, empowering children to be successful. Ben is currently a trainee solicitor at Morgan Sports Law, having joined the firm last year after graduating from Cambridge University. He regularly writes articles for his Rugby and the Law blog, and in his spare time is a keen sportsman, being the former national and European sailing champion. So, a very, very warm welcome, Daniel and Ben.
Thanks for having us, Rob. Pleasure to be here.
Hi. Yeah, cheers, Rob.
Absolute pleasure to have you both. So before we dive into all of your amazing achievements and experience to date, we do have a customary icebreaker question here on the Legally Speaking podcast, which is, on the scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very real, how real would you rate the reality hit series Suits in terms of its reality? I think it's fair for me to go to Ben for this one.
Yeah, I think I'd probably have to give it about a 1, to be honest. I think about the only thing that's real about it is the fact that it's to do with lawyers. Put it this way, I've never seen Harvey draft anything.
Yeah, I think a 1 is probably a fair outcome. And a lot of people say the fact that he can be a corporate lawyer one day, a litigator the next day, and various others. I'm yet to see somebody who can master that. So let's start at the beginning. And Dan, coming to you first, tell our listeners a bit about your background and upbringing.
Yeah, I was Samoan by heritage, small Pacific Island, only really known for exporting coconuts and rugby players. So, I was one of those, went to New Zealand at a young age, went through the schooling system in New Zealand and played rugby all my life. Was probably destined. Dad was a massive rugby fan, really pushed me into rugby. I wouldn't say he was as far going as like Serena Williams' dad or anything like that. Was his dad, but I think there was probably a bit of desperation that rugby would be a way for me to provide for the family, which it became. So and then moved over to the UK at about 22 years of age to Wasps, and played 15 careers at various clubs throughout Europe before retiring 3 or 4 years ago. Played for Samoa throughout that period, which was real pleasure. And a couple of World Cups as well. So, and then sort of transitioned into this role that I'm doing now, helping to look after and use the experience that I built up over the last sort of 15 or 20 years playing to try and pass that on and help the next crop of not just Pacific players, but a lot of the work that we do is actually for the greater good of all athletes that play the game of rugby. As we'll probably get into later.
Yeah, we're definitely going to jump into all of that. And Ben, how about you? Tell us a bit about your sort of background and upbringing.
Yeah, so I'm, as you said in the introduction, I'm a trainee solicitor at Morgan Sports Law, and I graduated in 2019 from Cambridge University. So I'm pretty fresh in my legal career, I suppose. But, I have a huge passion for sports law, which is the area that obviously I'm working in. I'm very fortunate to have got into that field at this point in my career. But I also have a great interest in rugby and always have done. I think perhaps from my New Zealand heritage, I'm half Kiwi as well. So I think that part of my blood has drawn me to the game, I suppose. And although I've never been a player of any great caliber, it's always been something that I've had a great interest in. And in recent years, I've sort of tried to combine that with my passion for law and set up my Rugby and the Law blog and working to develop my expertise in that field, really.
Yeah, great stuff. And I do follow your blog, and anyone listening should definitely check it out, particularly as me as a rugby enthusiast fan. I think the content you produce is super interesting. So Dan, you touched on it just as part of your sort of intro there, but before becoming the CEO of Pacific Rugby Players Welfare, you were a professional rugby player. Tell us about some of those experiences and what that was actually like.
Yeah, fantastic. I was really lucky to play, the pinnacle of the game, with some of the, the world's top players, World Cup winners, at a couple of World Cups, as I said myself. I guess, the day in, day out of being a professional rugby player is, probably like any other job, it's got its ups, but it's also got its downs, and it can be a lot more mundane than, the games are great, but the training in between, can be pretty tough, particularly, those early sort of Tuesday, Wednesday sessions where you just, they try and replicate, they try and make those training sessions harder than games so that when you get to the games, it's, it's theoretically easier. That may work when you're younger, but when you sort of get into your early 30s and you're trying to hang on, it can get quite tough. So, it's, a lot of traveling that can be difficult, short contracts, 1 to 2 year contracts most of the time, having to chase the egg around the world, which sounds, again, romantic, but, when you pick up a wife and a couple of kids along the way, it gets tougher, harder and harder. So, I had a great time. As I said earlier, was really privileged, I guess, to be able to play for my country, my dad's country, Samoa, and represent them on a number of occasions. And it's like anything, you look back and I'm proud of what I achieved, but I feel like, I've got a lot more to do now. Maybe, I was never a superstar of the game, but I feel like maybe the mark that I can leave and the legacy that I can leave is more of the work that I'm doing now, as opposed to anything I could do, or couldn't do on the field. So,
Good stuff. And do you have a particular highlight that stands out to you from your professional playing days?
Oh, I guess on a club level, probably winning the Heineken Cup of Wasps against, side by side with guys like Lawrence Dallaglio and Josh Lucy, Simon Shaw, Ibanez. We had a team full of superstars, and that was amazing. Actually, I was really young when it happened. I'd only been in England for 2 years when that had happened, and I didn't realise how special that, winning those sorts of, it was normal to me at that stage because Wasps were winning everything. And then at the end, I sort of got to 30, 35 and I hadn't won a trophy in 10 years. And you realise those are special moments. But playing in a World Cup as well, my second one was in New Zealand, and that was almost a home World Cup for us, given the amount of Samoans that have migrated to New Zealand, including my family. So that was really awesome as well. Arriving to the airport from Samoa to Auckland and having 10,000 fans greet us at the airport, just screaming. It was like, the closest that you could get to, I guess, to being a pop star that I'll ever experience. Those are cool moments, yeah.
I'm banned from attending any more World Cups because I was in Tokyo with England and I was in Paris against South Africa twice. So all my friends are saying I'm the bad luck omen. So I'm not allowed to go to any more World Cup finals. So that we're going to move swiftly on from a World Cup. But that sounds like an amazing experience. So we've touched on it again, Dan, just sticking with you, the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare earlier, but for people not familiar with it, can you tell us more about it and why it was set up?
Yeah, I guess it's a movement by former players, myself being at the forefront as director of that, but really there was about a good 50 players around the world that really came together to put this organisation together and give it the feet it needed. The Samoan culture is very hierarchical, and the Pacific Island culture, so I couldn't have done anything like this by myself because I would have been very difficult for me to reach out to the Fijians and Tongans and Wallace and Fortunans and New Caledonians as a Samoan, but also my age would have counted against me because the way our culture is structured is the more grey hair you have on your head, the more respect you're given. So there was a lot of senior guys, a lot more senior than me, who'd been part of those Pacific Island teams, particularly from Samoa, that really put Pacific Island rugby on the map in the World Cups in 91 and 95. Guys like Mike Umaga and Junior Paramore and guys like that, to really put this organisation together. And really it's a support mechanism. It's a network to support the hundreds of players, if not thousands of players now, that are playing professional and semi-professional rugby of Pacific Island descent around the world. So, and giving them the skills that they need in terms of the community, but also some of the things like, that Morgan Sports and Ben offered to us, the legal services behind that are so important to have those resources when it comes to dealing with contracts and moving overseas and cultural integration and everything like that. So, a whole lot of arms to the organisation. But yeah, really, I guess in a nutshell, it's a support network for professional rugby players from the islands.
Yeah, and I love that word you used there about community as well, because I think the organisation slogan is stronger together. So how did you arrive at that? And is there anything else you would add just around that particular slogan from your side?
I mean, it was probably quite cliche now, stronger together. We chucked it down and we thought that would be awesome. And then I think the South African rugby team picked it up, and almost every organisation uses that slogan now. So we're in the process of actually possibly changing that up and, making it, a bit more unique again. But I guess that just reflected where we were at the time, as we needed to come together because, like anything, you're weak when you're divided. Our colonial past of the Pacific Islands is evident of that. Thousands of years ago, the Pacific were one people. We inter-traveled between the islands and we saw ourselves as one people. And the first thing that the colonials came in and said, no, you're all separate countries, you're all different people groups. And that made us weak. So we knew that for some of the battles that we faced in terms of the professional rugby landscape, we would be stronger again together and united. We couldn't do it as former Samoa rugby players or Fiji rugby or Tonga players. We had to come together and really, because a lot of the difficulties we face are shared between those people groups. So we would do better fighting and banding together to take those on.
Yeah, and I love that, and I couldn't agree more. Ben, switching to a slightly sort of legal point, a large part of what the organisation done is supporting players by striving for more fairness and transparency in sports law. I believe in January it was announced that World Rugby will introduce a fit and proper persons test for elected officials, a matter that I believe you helped to advise on. Do you think that move goes far enough?
Well, just to be clear, I wasn't involved in advising World Rugby at all, but it's something that Dan and I looked at in last summer when we put together a report to go to World Rugby's working group that was looking at governance. And that was one of the things we addressed was the eligibility of people to hold positions within World Rugby, and particularly on the World Rugby Council and their executive committee, which are essentially sort of the legislative bodies and the decision-making bodies of World Rugby. It's something that we've looked at in quite a lot of detail. I think that the announcement in January by World Rugby, on the face of it, is a positive. It's really good to see that they've taken action and addressed what is a key issue, we feel. But I think the proof will be in the pudding. It's too early really to say whether it's going to achieve what we'd like it to achieve, because frankly, there hasn't been any detail released around it yet, which is understandable because they're only sort of at the interim stage of their review. And also, the full findings, I'm sure, may not have yet been produced. So it's still early days in that respect, but I think it's certainly something that is necessary. That last year there was, of course, the controversy surrounding Francis Keane, who was Fiji's representative on the World Rugby Council, and as Dan knows all too well and could probably give a little more detail on, he was previously convicted of manslaughter and was sort of involved in a few things which were probably not becoming of someone in a position on, within a world governing body of sport. So that really highlighted the fact that World Rugby doesn't really have procedures in place to deal with the nature of the people who are going to be sitting on its committees and their perhaps past conduct. And clearly it's something that needs to be addressed because, if you look at most other major governing bodies, whether it's football, cricket, athletics, they all have very stringent processes for selecting people who are going to sit on those decision-making bodies. Really pleased that it's something that's been picked up on, but there's still more to be done.
Yeah, no, and thanks for sharing that. Very, very interesting to see how things will evolve over time. And sticking with you, Ben, so the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare recently announced a partnership with Morgan Sports Law. Can you tell us more about what that partnership involves?
Yeah, so that partnership involves us providing legal support to Pacific Rugby Players Welfare and its members. It's a partnership that we're really pleased about. We feel that our values as a firm align very closely with the values of Pacific Rugby Players Welfare. As a firm, we're pretty focused on protecting athletes' rights and doing what we can to support athletes. Often they end up in weaker positions. And so it's important, we feel, to be able to give them proper representation. So it's a partnership that we're really, really excited to have, and we're really looking forward to doing work with Dan and his organisation going forward. We'll see us advise them, we imagine, on issues relating to players' contracts, but also some of these wider issues, like you mentioned before, with the fit and proper person test being an example, these wider governance issues which really affect players across the game, but perhaps particularly those in the more vulnerable positions like those from the Pacific.
And Dan, from your side, obviously it's relatively new, this partnership. How do you see it evolving over time? And what sort of future plans do you see?
Geez, I think I don't think Ben and Morgan Sports probably knew what they were getting into when they first offered to come in and partner with us. Ben and I have spent a lot of time on the phone on a lot of different issues at all times of the day and night. I'm here in Brisbane, and in the UK, it's trying to touch bases can be difficult. But for me, I've got no concept at all of anything. I've got no legal background. My background was in communications and journalism, and I learned sometimes the hard way to outsource quite well. And when Morgan Sports came and said, look, we're keen to partner with you guys, it was a godsend really, because so many of the battles that we have, even making, and I'm sure we'll get into this later, but making a documentary, the legal intricacies of doing something, taking on something like that, and are huge. So yeah, there's been a number of different fronts, and the thing about Pacific Island rugby and particularly in welfare is it is it's a real minefield. You just don't know what you're going to get, what's going to be thrown at you. But the good thing, I've sort of followed Ben a lot on social media and some of the stuff he was doing personally. And then Morgan Sports being very specific in the sports law is really helpful to us. We actually had a big firm that provided a lot of our support in the initial stages of setting up the organisation. But we've moved on to that, to being a real support to the players now, and having a company like Morgan behind us just gives us real clout. Really, it just means that every conversation that we have, means it's not just coming from Dan Leo. We've got the guns behind us. Should we need them, we haven't had to go down that path many times, but we've got the access there for our players should we need it. Let's hope that we don't. But you've got to always, plan for the worst. And we're really looking forward to where this relationship's going to go into the future.
Yeah, no, well said. And Ben, you began working as a trainee solicitor last year, I believe. How did you find the process of applying for firms, and what factors did you think about that helped you obtain your training contract? As I think a lot of people would be well aware, it's hard enough getting a training contract in itself, and probably even more competitive in the area of sports law. Yeah,
I think it's fair to say that there aren't that many training contracts in sports law specifically. So I recognise that I'm incredibly fortunate to be in the position that I am, as I think I mentioned earlier. But when I was looking for training contracts, I was looking around a wide variety of firms. I had this idea relatively early into my university days that sports law would be something I'd like to work in. So I was looking at firms that had some expertise in that field, albeit that I realised if I was going to be a trainee, it's probably not something I would see until a number of years down the line. But actually, after my first year at university, I got an internship at Morgan Sports Law, as well as a couple of other sports firms. Which is something I simply got by reaching out, writing emails, asking if they did work experience and that sort of thing. And I was fortunate enough to get an internship at Morgan Sports Law, and really the relationship went from there. So although when it came to applying for training contracts, I was looking at a variety of firms, and obviously, there's always the lure of the city and what they can offer. I just decided that really I wanted to focus on sports law because I knew it was what my ultimate goal was going to be. When the opportunity came up to do a training contract with Sports Law and sort of get straight into the field that I wanted to end up in, it was a no-brainer. I also had some experience at a city firm, but I just felt it wasn't for me. My interest was really in sport and the legal issues around that, rather than, I suppose, some of the more traditional fields of corporate law, perhaps. That's not to say that I'm not interested in the commercial aspects of sport and business around that. Of course I am. And that's actually one of the things I love about working in sports law, is that it is so varied. Because although we talk about sports law being a field, I mean, what is sports law? It's just really the law as it applies to sport. Yes, there are sort of really specific niche areas like, I suppose, anti-doping, which is only something that crops up in the context of sport. But really, there's such a variety of things that a sports lawyer does. And so that's really one of the most attractive things about it.
And that's interesting, because that leads nicely on to what I was going to ask next, in terms of what's it actually like working as a sports law? What are some of the experiences you've had thus far whilst completing your training contract?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned before, I only started my training contract last year. So I'm only 6 months in at this point. But really, I suppose the main thing is that it's been very varied. I've worked on a variety of matters, whether it's to do with anti-doping cases, personal injury matters, disciplinary cases. It's really incredibly varied. And I think that's one of the things I enjoy most about it. Obviously, as a trainee, there are some of the sort of stereotypical trainee tasks that you would do. But I think probably the best thing about working for the Morgan Sports Store is that as it's a small firm, I'm able to take on some more responsibility than I probably would get at a big city firm, for example. So, I've been involved in drafting submissions, witness statements, interviewing clients, etc. So, yeah, really hands-on, which is fantastic. I really enjoy getting stuck in, and it's a challenge because obviously it's not something I've done before, but I love that. And I feel like I'm sort of learning a lot every single day, and that's really, I suppose, the best you can hope for it as a trainee.
And it's great how you've managed to combine your passions of sports and law. And I guess people listening in who may have a passion, let's say, in technology, you gave some good insight earlier about how you got your training contract through a lot of networking, and putting yourself out there. Is there a sort of top tip you would give to aspiring lawyers, or maybe even lawyers looking to transition into another practice area that they're more passionate about, that you would give that would work for them?
Well, I think you touched on it there. I think it's about putting yourself out there. I think having the confidence to reach out to people, especially in these sort of socially distant times. Just because you can't meet up with people in person doesn't mean there aren't networking opportunities out there. In fact, I've probably done some of my best networking during the pandemic online. People are really accessible these days on social media, or obviously by email as well. But it's not too difficult to make contacts. I mean, particularly in the sports law world, I find that everyone is really open and willing to chat. But I'm sure the same can be said of many sectors. And so, I suppose my biggest tip would be just to be confident to reach out to people, and you never know where a conversation might lead, or where an email exchange might lead. And it's the only way to sort of access new opportunities, I guess, is to make new connections and try and expand your network. But also, just trying to develop your expertise. I suppose that might be a bit too strong, but sort of trying to grow your knowledge base in the area you want to work in is obviously really important too. Whether it's just listening to loads of podcasts about the area, or reading up on it, writing about it. Obviously for me that's been a major driver of my knowledge base. Writing my blog is it's given me opportunities because people have fortunately read it and enjoyed it, but also the actual process of writing it has allowed me to expand my knowledge base greatly. And that was probably the reason I set it up in the first place, was really for myself. It wasn't to become a blogger or to entertain the masses. Absolutely not. I'm not under any illusions that my blog will appeal to the masses. But really, it was set up for me to work on my own legal writing and to, like I mentioned loads of times, expand my knowledge base. And I think that's got to be key. So networking and growing your field of expertise.
And I love those tips. And the thing you talk about there, whilst you were being quite humble in that, if you produce content, that will increase your visibility. If you're putting valuable content out into your ecosystem, visibility will inevitably lead to conversations, and that will inevitably lead to opportunities. So for people who are thinking about starting a blog within your particular areas or whatever, if you produce valuable content, then you will naturally foster relationships. So Dan, we have to move to you and your filmmaking career. So last year, I believe, you released Oceans Apart, greed, betrayal, and Pacific Island film, in which you discussed how you sacrificed your own career to confront the corruption that existed in the national union. And you also examined the darker side of the sport. So can you tell us a bit more about it and why you decided to make that film?
To relate to what Ben was saying, our goal was to try and reach the masses, I suppose, and particularly around the challenges that we face as Pacific rugby players and the Pacific Island rugby unions, and some of the, I guess the injustices that we feel currently exist around areas like eligibility and the weighting of the voting system and the council, those sorts of things. But through my career, it just struck me speaking to people who loved rugby, who were really, loved the Pacific Islands, how little they knew about the actual challenges that existed for us, and how they could help, I suppose, once they did become aware of it. So we wanted to do that en masse, and hence the concept of the Oceans Apart film. It took us 3 years to film. It was very difficult at times. Culturally, again, I mentioned it earlier, but we don't really speak up against our authority in the Pacific Islands, and that's probably one of the reasons why we are where we are. Is that just no one's wanted to step out, put their foot outside into out the boat and and test the waters. So yes, it was quite groundbreaking in that respect. But definitely with the motivation of actually trying to make the sport that we all love greater than it already is. And sometimes, unfortunately, you do have to take, to look, I guess, introspectively and retrospectively. So we needed to, look at the factors that, we believed influenced, negatively influenced possibly Pacific Island rugby, but also some of the cultural aspects around that we need to address within ourselves that are holding us back as well. So hopefully, it was quite difficult to do that within a 1 hour production. But, hopefully it raises, and inspires a bit more conversation around some of those points that we raised to create the positive change that we need to come out of it for the good of the game.
Yeah, well said. And for people who haven't seen it, where can they access or get visibility of it?
It's on Amazon Prime in the UK, also on Vimeo worldwide, but we're just about to premiere and a few of the other countries as well. So we're just late discussions here in Australia, and we really want to get that in front of it. It's only really premiered in the UK and the US at the moment. So we really want to get that in front of all the audiences and in all of the rugby playing nations. But also, the way that we tried to set it up is that you could watch it without having to be a rugby fan as well. So even if you don't know anything about rugby, we wanted people to be able to watch it and still get something, be able to take something from that. So we had it was a small team. We had a tiny budget. We had a £10,000 budget, which is unheard of, and it's been really well received. Credit to the team, including our friends at Morgan Sports who helped us sort out all the legalities, which was a huge task in itself, but we are where we are. A lot of goodwill from the rugby community has gone into being able to, not just the film to be able to be produced, but also for us as an organisation to stand on our feet and do the work that we're doing as well. We couldn't do it without all the volunteers, all the people that support us free of charge. And we've still got a lot of work to do, as anyone who's seen the film probably knows.
Good stuff. And for anyone wanting to become a member of the Pacific Rugby Players Welfare, how do they do that? And if people want to support the organisation generally, how can they get involved?
Yeah, we've just opened up membership. So for the first four years of our existence, we were only a membership group based for the players, for the Pacific players themselves. So you had to be a Pacific Island-based player to be a member. We've just opened that up to wider membership as well for people that want to support, but aren't necessarily players themselves or even of Pacific Island heritage. So that can all be done via our website, pacificrugbywelfare.com. Go on there, you can see a bit more about what we're about. Obviously, we don't have time to get into all of the strands of the stuff that we do here, but there is some really good work being done there. So anyone that wants to support, just please, if you can't do that through the website, please contact me directly on either LinkedIn or Twitter, and I'll make sure that your support is well channeled. Good
stuff. And Ben, finally, we did talk a lot about the Rugby and the Law blog. So how can people access that, and how can people get in touch with you if they've got any questions about sports law or anything you've discussed today?
Yeah, so the blog is www.rugbyandthelaw.com. It's also on Twitter. It's also on Facebook, but I don't really use Facebook that much. But on Twitter @RugbyandTheLaw. People can find me on Twitter @Ben_Cisneros on LinkedIn. And if they have any inquiries about anything they discuss, feel free to reach out to me via any of those channels or at my email address, which is ben.cisneros@morgansl.com.
Brilliant. Well, that just leads me to say thank you both so much. Dan, Ben, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Wishing you both lots of continued success, not only with your partnership, but your own careers and endeavours. But from all of us on the Legally Speaking podcast, over and out.
Thanks, Rob.
Thanks, Rob.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Legally Speaking podcast. If you enjoyed the show and want to help support us, remember to leave us a rating and review on Apple iTunes. You can also support the show and gain exclusive benefits, bonus content, and much more by signing up to our Patreon page, which is www.patreon.com/Legally Speaking podcast. Thanks for listening. Today's episode is the end of season 3 of our Legally Speaking podcast. Special thanks to all our amazing guests that are featured on the show. Fear not, we'll be back in the beginning of April with the launch of our season 4. We have so many special guests to feature, from Richard Branson's former lawyer right the way through to top legal influencers and more. If you want to know about the world of law, careers, legal inspiration, or just curious to know more about law, do let us know. Over and out.